It didn't happen during a record-breaking game. It didn't happen after a championship win. It happened quietly, when people realized they were seeing the same name everywhere, whether they asked for it or not. Suddenly, Caitlin Clark wasn't just showing up on highlight reels. She was on timelines, headlines, merch drops, and brand promos that sold out before most fans even finished refreshing the page. Jerseys vanished. Limited releases disappeared in minutes. And every time something new dropped, the reaction was the same: shock, followed by frustration from people who felt like someone else deserved that attention more. Because while Clark was dominating conversations, another player was dominating the league. Aya Wilson was putting together one of the most complete stretches of basketball the WNBA had seen in years. Night after night, she was doing exactly what legends are supposed to do: winning, leading, and stacking achievements that normally define an era. Yet somehow, that wasn't the story everyone was telling. The league had a problem it couldn't ignore anymore. The best player wasn't the most talked about. And the most talked about player wasn't slowing down. Fans started asking uncomfortable questions. Why did one player's accomplishments feel quieter than another's presence? Why did certain names spark endless debate while others barely trended? And why did it feel like attention had become more valuable than dominance? This wasn't just a shift in popularity. It was the beginning of a new reality, one where visibility mattered just as much as performance, and sometimes even more. And once people noticed that imbalance, there was no unseeing it. If basketball were the only thing that mattered, this wouldn't even be a conversation. Aya Wilson checked every box the league has ever valued. She was dominant without being flashy, consistent without chasing headlines, and respected in every locker room she stepped into. MVP trophies, elite stats, leadership, the resume spoke for itself. This was the kind of career players are told will naturally make them the face of the league. And for a while, it did. Wilson became the standard. The player younger stars were measured against. The name commentators used when they needed an example of what greatness actually looked like. She didn't need gimmicks, viral moments, or controversy. Her game did all the talking. That's what made the shift feel so jarring. Because even while she was putting up numbers that demanded attention, the spotlight kept drifting elsewhere. Post-game breakdowns turned into debates about popularity. Conversations about dominance turned into conversations about marketability. And somehow, excellence alone stopped being enough to control the narrative. From Wilson's perspective, it made no sense. She had earned this space the hard way, through years of grinding, improving, and carrying expectations without complaint. There was an unspoken belief that if you stayed patient and kept winning, recognition would follow. But the league around her was changing faster than anyone expected. And Wilson was about to learn that doing everything right doesn't always guarantee you stay at the center of the story. The turning point wasn't a bad game or a missed opportunity. It was when the numbers started talking louder than the stats. Caitlin Clark wasn't just bringing points to the league, she was bringing people. New people. Viewers who hadn't watched the WNBA before. Fans who didn't know team rivalries but knew her name. Kids asking for jerseys. Casual sports fans suddenly tuning in just to see what the hype was about. That kind of attention changes everything. Merchandise tied to Clark didn't just sell well, it vanished. Limited drops were gone in minutes. Jerseys outsold expectations. Even casual items attached to her name sparked demand that most players never see, no matter how talented they are. For brands, that kind of reaction isn't exciting. It's irresistible. And that's where the gap widened. Aya Wilson was still dominating on the court, but dominance doesn't always translate to purchases. Clark's appeal stretched beyond basketball. She crossed into mainstream sports culture, social media debates, and everyday conversations that had nothing to do with box scores. At some point, the conversation quietly flipped. It stopped being about who was better and became about who moved the needle, who brought eyes, who brought energy, who made people feel like they were watching something they couldn't miss. That realization didn't erase Wilson's greatness, but it did make her position feel less secure than it ever had before. At first, nothing seemed out of place. No rants. No callouts. No dramatic statements. Just a few short comments. When asked about the growing noise around Caitlin Clark, Aya Wilson brushed it off. She said she wasn't paying attention, that she was focused on the season, that there were more important things to worry about than outside chatter. On paper, it sounded calm, professional, controlled. But fans didn't hear it that way. Clips started circulating. Screenshots spread. People replayed her words, slowed them down, analyzed tone, posture, and timing. Suddenly, neutral responses were being framed as frustration. Silence was interpreted as resentment. And what once came across as humility was now being recast as bitterness. Fair or not, perception took over. Some fans felt Wilson had every right to be annoyed. Others believed she was struggling with no longer being the center of attention. The internet, as always, picked sides quickly and loudly. What mattered most wasn't what Wilson meant, but how people chose to read it. And once that narrative took hold, it stuck. Because in a league learning how to live with constant attention, even the quietest comments can become the loudest story. At some point, the conversation stopped being driven by players or brands. Fans took over. Every debate turned into a comparison. Best player versus biggest star. Earned dominance versus undeniable buzz. Social media became a non-stop battleground where every highlight, every stat line, and every interview was used as evidence for one side or the other. And Caitlin Clark kept winning the attention war. Fans didn't just watch her games. They followed her journey. They talked about her like someone they knew, not just someone they admired. She felt accessible in a way that pulled people in, especially newer fans who weren't attached to WNBA history or legacy arguments. For them, Clark was the entry point. That kind of connection is rare. People didn't want to just see her succeed. They wanted to be part of it. Wear the jersey. Defend her online. Tune in early because something unexpected might happen. And if you've ever wondered how stars are really made, it usually starts right there. When fans feel personally invested, not just impressed. If you're into these behind-the-scenes shifts that don't always show up on the scoreboard, this is exactly the kind of story we break down here, so staying connected makes a lot of sense. Meanwhile, the divide kept growing. Not because one player was failing, but because attention had become a limited resource, and only one name seemed to be getting more of it every week. From the outside, it looked like a betrayal. Nike had been aligned with Aya Wilson for years. She represented everything the brand usually celebrates: consistency, dominance, professionalism, and leadership. She was dependable, predictable in the best way. A safe investment in a league that was still finding its footing. So when Nike's attention started drifting, people assumed it had to be personal. But brands don't operate on emotions. They operate on momentum. Behind the scenes, the numbers were impossible to ignore. Engagement spikes. Search trends. Social media traffic that didn't fade after a big game, but grew every week. Caitlin Clark wasn't just popular. She was pulling in audiences Nike hadn't been able to reach before. Younger fans. Casual fans. People who didn't even consider themselves WNBA viewers until her name kept popping up everywhere. That kind of pull creates pressure. Nike didn't wake up one morning and decide to replace anyone. They were reacting to a shift that was already happening in real time. When a player starts driving conversations without needing to be pushed, brands don't ask if they should lean in, they ask how fast they can. And that's what made this situation so uncomfortable. Because from Wilson's perspective, it probably felt like loyalty stopped mattering. Years of carrying the league, representing the brand, doing everything right, and suddenly the spotlight wasn't guaranteed anymore. Not because she declined, but because someone else generated more noise. From Nike's perspective, it was simpler. Attention equals growth. Growth equals survival. And Clark was opening doors the league had struggled to unlock for decades. No villain. No clear winner. Just a collision between earned respect and undeniable momentum. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because at some point, it became clear this wasn't really about Caitlin Clark or Aya Wilson as individuals. It was about a truth that exists in every sport, but rarely gets said plainly. Being the best doesn't always make you the most valuable. Aya Wilson represented excellence in its purest form. The kind that coaches love. The kind that wins games. The kind that earns respect from peers who actually understand how hard this league is. But respect doesn't always translate to reach, and reach is what keeps a league alive. Caitlin Clark represented something different. She wasn't just a player people admired. She was a player people talked about, argued over, defended, criticized, watched even when they said they didn't like her. And that kind of attention has weight. It changes broadcast decisions. It changes marketing budgets. It changes which stories get told first. That's the part that stings. Because when attention becomes currency, silence feels like punishment. And for someone like Wilson, who had already proven everything there was to prove, being overshadowed didn't just feel unfair. It felt like the rules had changed without warning. Fans sensed it too. Some rallied harder behind Wilson, insisting greatness was being ignored. Others leaned fully into Clark, arguing that growth matters more than tradition. And instead of bringing people together, the debate drew a line straight down the middle of the league's audience. What made it worse was that neither side was wrong. Wilson was still the standard. Clark was still the engine. And the league needed both, even if it didn't know how to balance them yet. That tension didn't explode overnight. It simmered, built slowly, and by the time everyone realized how deep it ran, the conversation had already moved past basketball entirely. In the end, this story isn't about jealousy, disrespect, or one player being pushed aside for another. It's about a league standing at a crossroads. The WNBA is growing faster than it ever has, and growth doesn't come quietly. It brings uncomfortable shifts, hard conversations, and moments where long-standing expectations collide with new realities. Caitlin Clark didn't take anything from Aya Wilson. And Aya Wilson didn't suddenly stop being great. What changed was the ecosystem around them. The league learned that attention can move faster than legacy. Brands learned that momentum doesn't wait for fairness. And fans learned that excellence and popularity don't always walk hand in hand. Wilson will still be remembered as one of the most dominant players the game has ever seen. That doesn't disappear because of headlines or merch sales. And Clark's rise doesn't invalidate anyone else's grind. It simply reflects a moment where timing, visibility, and culture lined up perfectly. What happens next is the real question. Does the league find a way to honor greatness while embracing growth? Can multiple stars coexist without being framed as rivals? And will fans ever stop turning success into a zero-sum game? Those answers aren't clear yet. But one thing is, this era of women's basketball is louder, faster, and more complicated than anything that came before it, and we're only at the beginning. If this breakdown made you see the situation differently, let me know what side you're on in the comments. Hit like if you want more deep dives like this, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story everyone's going to be arguing about.